Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are going to take a look at a Steyr semi-auto rifle design from just before World War I. Now, in 1909, the KUK government decided that it wanted to find itself a new self-loading rifle for the military. And they held some trials, and Steyr was one of 6 different companies that ended up submitting designs. So very little is documented about these trials. I would like to find out more about them. For the time being, what we know is that Steyr submitted this rifle, which is, we have designated its model of 1911. They actually patented the design in 1909, submitted it to the trials. The trials went on for a little while and ultimately came back inconclusive. The Austrian government decided that war was looking like it was pretty imminent, and they decided they were better off sticking with the guns that they had, that they could produce, that they had all the infrastructure and training around for, rather than trying to go through the expense and the trouble of re-equipping everyone with a new rifle right on the eve of what was looking like a war, which did in fact turn out to be a substantial war. So Steyr manufactured a small number of these in a military pattern for trials. I have no information about trials reports. I don't know how they performed, unfortunately. However, after the trials, Steyr did then continue to manufacture a civilian version of the exact same gun commercially, and sold a few, but not very many. Now, mechanically, this is a ridiculously complex, well, machining-wise, manufacturing-wise, this is a ridiculously complex gun. Mechanically, it is actually very similar to the Gewehr 41 produced by the Germans during World War II, and it's really interesting to me whether they may very well have used this as inspiration. So let me show you how that actually works. Now, this works using a two-lug rotating bolt, which you can see right there, and it needs to have a little bit of a run-up of steam to get this fully closed, but you can see the cam surface there where the bolt rotates. There we go, and there it is, locked fully into battery. We have an operating rod right here that is going to run forward, and if you take the bolt handle and pull it away, you can actually disconnect the bolt from the operating rod here, so it will float freely without being under spring tension. The recoil spring is not behind the bolt, it is inside the stock on the operating rod, much like the M1 Garand. One of the more unusual features on the military pattern rifle here is this weird trigger guard. This, the best I can come up with, is probably a hand stop for shooting, but it's an unusual idea. Located just behind that is the safety. So the rearward position is the fire position, and the forward position is safe. That's nice and big, so it's easily used, and then presumably that's why it's got this protective guard around it so it doesn't get accidentally bumped or damaged. One of the cool and complex features here is this rotating dust cover that is automatically engaged by the bolt handle. So you can see this little angled track there. When I cycle the bolt back, that automatically opens up the dust cover, and it works both ways. So when the bolt goes home, it automatically pushes this dust cover back down. So there it is, fully closed. It's not uncommon to find something like this that automatically opens, but finding one that automatically closes as well is a bit unusual. We have military-style sights here, just a rear notch sight. It goes out to 1,400 meters. The magazine is 5 rounds of the rotary type, as you would get with like a Steyr Mannlicher sporting rifle. So this is a wind-up deal there. And then at the back, attached to the end of the magazine's travel, is a little hold-open stud right there, which you can see coming up into position and lowering down. So when the magazine's empty, that serves to lock the bolt open. You would then put in a stripper clip right here. That's going to hold the bolt back as long as the clip's in place. You strip your 5 rounds into the magazine, which is going to cause it to rotate, and then when you pull the clip out, the bolt is able to go forward. The trials rifles that Steyr supplied here were in 7mm Mauser caliber, and that's actually the only marking on this gun, aside from a few serial number marks. So 7mm, they don't even identify it specifically as 7 Mauser. nothing on the top of the receiver. We have a serial number 8 back here on the stock, and we have one up on the muzzle. Before we get quite up to that point, I think it's worth pointing out the military-style wrist-mounted sling swivel here with a semi-pistol grip stock. However, despite being a military rifle, they did put some nice checkering back here on the middle of the stock. And then we have a sling bar on the front, on the side, to match with the wrist-mounted bar in the back. And then at the front, we have another big chunk of mechanical oddness. So nice heavy protective wings around a barleycorn front sight. And then we have a locking catch right here, which, when we push that down, allows us to unscrew, it's reverse threaded, we can unscrew this muzzle cap. Now, this is the sort of thing that you'll see when we get it off in a moment. This is going to get carboned up if you start shooting the rifle a lot. And so they actually put on a tool socket right here. This is cut specifically the size of a 7x57 Mauser case head. So if this muzzle cap gets sticky, you can take one of your cartridges, slide it in there, and use it as a lever to unscrew this muzzle cap. So you can see this is actually threaded directly onto the barrel. And then we have an operating rod right here underneath. And then in this muzzle cap, we actually have a little annular gas piston, which I'm going to see if I can drop out for you guys. So there is the gas piston. This is very, very similar to the Gewehr 41 that the Germans would develop, 30 years after this. In fact, it's so close that one really has to wonder if this was an inspiration for the Gewehr 41. Now, the way this works is when you've got this mounted on the muzzle comes to here, and you have this open section with a restrictor plug there. So gas pressure is going to accumulate very briefly inside here. It will then act on this gas piston, which will push it backwards. That piston then pushes on this operating rod, which has its own little return spring. So this pushes there. That operating rod comes down inside the stock to here, where it matches up with this operating rod connected to the bolt and forces the bolt open. Walther would take this concept and copy it almost exactly, at least as far as the gas operating system works. They didn't use the rotating bolt so much, perhaps to their own detriment, but very interesting how similar that system is. After the somewhat inconclusive trials, Steyr would in fact release this as a commercial sporting rifle. Note that they have actually now marked it Steyr and given it the designation of model 1911 there. A little bit of just texturing on the top of the receiver. It now has sporting style sights. It has this very interesting element, which is just an opening sort of trap door in the top of the stock. And what you see in there is actually the very end of the op rod coming in from the front. And I suspect this is a lubrication point. Not 100% sure, but that seems to be the most reasonable explanation for it. We then have a somewhat simplified muzzle. The sight is now a sporting style sight without the protectors. They have gotten away from the little tool segment, so you can use a cartridge case to pry this open, presumably because as a sporting rifle it wouldn't be fired enough for that to really become a problem. They do have a little bit of knurling up here to give you a grip on it instead. And the action is virtually identical. Still has a rotating dust cover on it, which you can see there. This one's a little smoother to close, so get a better idea of how that dust cover works right there. The safety has been reduced in scale substantially because, well, it's not a military rifle, so you don't have to worry about it being quite so tactical, I suppose. But it still works the same way. Front is safe, rear is fire. We still have a 5-round rotary mag. These were apparently in 6.5 by 54 Mannlicher caliber. And of course they have a nice sporting style stock. End cap on it, nice checkering on the pistol grip, as well as checkering on the forend. Now, to disassemble these rifles further, which unfortunately we're not able to do this time, you would take the stock off, and then this end cap on the receiver will rotate off. You can then disconnect, use this to disconnect the bolt from the op rod, and then interestingly, you actually have a Mannlicher style bolt stop here, and that doesn't do anything to lock the bolt open while the rifle's assembled. Instead, I believe that's there as a safety feature, because the lug on this stop will interrupt the locking lug here if the bolt tries to go too far back. It'll hit that and stop rather than hit the back of the receiver. And once you've got the rear end cap off for disassembly, you would then push this in and be able to remove the bolt entirely. Like I said, we're not able to do that on this particular rifle, but I think we know what the insides would look like if we could. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed getting a look at these two rifles. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to track down some of the other experimental guns from this pre-World War I trials period. Or even better would be finding some of the trials reports. Maybe we could find out a bit about how this actually performed. So unfortunately, as of the time of this filming, I haven't been able to find any of that. So if you know about where it might be found, please, by all means, mention so down in the comments, and hopefully we can find some more info. Thanks for watching.